All right, let's do it.
Okay, awesome. So, hey, welcome you guys to another episode. So, Brent and I were just chatting a second ago. He was starting his story. He didn't realize we weren't recording, so I had to start recording. We're going to dive back in. This podcast is going to be all about really just educating you guys on the benefits of the strength training, creating resilience in your body, blending the two between prehab and rehab, not shying away from pushing yourself physically, and understanding that pain is a part of the process, but there's a healthy dose of pain. It's going to be really fun, and I'm excited for Brent to share this. Why don't you dive into what you were just sharing and tell people who you are first, what you do, but then let's dive into that and let's
Cool.
roll.
Yeah, man. Yeah, so a little bit of background about myself is I'm a sports chiropractor. I'm kind of based on the South Shore of Boston, Mass, but I do a lot of work with people, online nowadays, helping them to navigate the ins and outs of pains, aches and pains that come with training, right? I think like the way we look at this historically is that like hurt equals harm, but the more and more research that I consume in the area of like musculoskeletal pain, the more and more I come back to this approach of viewing rehab and performance as kind of like one and the same, and needing to progress people through a plan of care that helps them ultimately arrive at their goals, as opposed to like, using some arbitrary indicator of uh, quad strength or low back extensor strength as like the reason to graduate somebody from a rehab program, right? I think, Kyle, probably in your world, like when it comes to CrossFit and dealing with aches and pains, like there's almost always a little something going on, right?
100%.
That's like a staple of movement and like living your life in motion. So when it comes down to it, being able to identify what's a tolerable amount of pain, like what might need and warrant further investigation, and then coming up with a plan to optimize your performance, but ultimately limit the likelihood for injury, right? Because like the less injured we are, the more we're able to train and push ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell people a little bit about your story. So you were telling me right before we dove into this, when you were 15, like you went through some things with some back injuries. Like tell people that story because I think that gives some amazing context.
Yeah. So I think this is one of the things that like at the time that it happened, it was like the worst thing that could have happened to 15-year-old me. But like now as I look back on it, it's very largely uh, the reason that I've ended up doing what I do nowadays, right? So I'm super grateful for it in hindsight. But so at the time I was 15, I was playing high school basketball, and I was a super active kid. Like I was just a gamer. I loved to play everything. I love to train. Like I remember at the time, like reading a lot of Mike Boyle stuff, and like I would read that personally and be like, oh wow, like if I can deadlift more, knowing nothing, 15-year-old me knowing nothing about training variables or anything like that, I was like, oh, if I can deadlift more, I can increase my vertical jump, right? And so probably my Achilles heel back then was it was really just not understanding like the balance between training hard and then recovering hard. So I was pushing myself, pretty hard. I ended up with a stress fracture in my low back, and like I said, that was tough because at that point in time, at 15 years old, your entire identity is linked to the sport you play. And
Yeah.
so, as a basketball player, I get handed from the orthopedist I had seen a big hard shell back brace, and he's like, all right, you're gonna wear this until you're pain free, and then from there we'll kind of like progress you back into activities. So I basically ended up being activity free for like 5 or 6 months, which like I live my life, especially now and even back then, as somebody who like I like a little bit of movement every day. Doesn't matter what it is, but like I like to get out there, get moving. I love to train. And so at that point in time, I was like, dude, this is the worst. So like I was the kid that they gave the hard shell back brace, but I went home and I'd sit in my driveway and do dribbling drills seated, and like found something I could do, right? It didn't cause pain, so like I could do something. And then from there, so I eventually like go through my rehab process, but like you wearing this hard shell back brace for 6 months, like at that age, like all of the muscle atrophy that takes place is insane. So like
Yeah. I can imagine. Oh my gosh.
like by the time I was getting back into like running, like I went through a full return to run program, and then like I was cleared to play basketball again. And like I just wasn't very resilient, right? Like a lot of it, like my spine had kind of, it was weaker. I'd taken a ton of rest, obviously, as prescribed, right? It's like their management plan, but I definitely needed some more targeted like strength and neuromuscular control at that age. And so I ended up seeing a sports chiropractor. It was the first time I had ever seen a chiropractor. And, so they're doing soft tissue therapy, things like active release technique and dry needling, help to loosen up the hips a lot. And that ultimately helped relieve a lot of like the pain and discomfort I was still experiencing, right? Like I didn't, I had this old, like healed fracture in my spine, but like it wasn't the fracture that was causing me pain. It was all the compensatory tightness and weakness that had come with the rehab or the rest process. And so after having gone through that, I was like, oh wow, this is very interesting that like there's a different management strategy where you can kind of like go right up to that level of discomfort, like comfortable discomfort, I call it, where you load something just enough to elicit an adaptation that increases strength and resilience.
Yep.
And so then from there, I was really interested early on in my career in like strength and conditioning and sports performance. That was what I studied in undergrad, and it was always around this like again having been like an early adopter of like Mike Boyle's stuff. I was reading a lot of Gray Cook. I loved the FMS and like being able to identify risk for injury. And so I would use that like in the early days where I would like help athletes obviously first and foremost limit the likelihood for injury, but then thereby optimize performance. I got into the powerlifting circuit a little bit, squatted heavy, deadlifted heavy, all those good things. Probably things that like my orthopedist from when I was 15 would be like, what are you doing? Kind of the type of stuff that, as somebody, like I almost, after my injury and then like subsequent rehab process, like anything that I would do, I would view like myself as the science experiment, right? Like I'd go into powerlifting, and I think when I first started working with, I was an intern at the for Delaware Strength and Conditioning with like a bunch of the D1 teams and stuff like that. And when you walk into a weight room at 18, I was a string bean, dude. And I think the like the coaches there, they're all into like super into powerlifting and probably ahead of their time in terms of like where we've come with like strength, right? Strength as medicine. And they were like, "Oh, we're gonna get you strong." So I dove into it, and I became like a student of that, like the periodization required to get strong as hell, and then ultimately like then start to refine things in your squat or in your deadlift so that you can get the most out of your body. And then of course, like in my case, I would always be looking for the exercises that okay, like I've got this old back injury, so I've got to be cognizant of this, but I don't want it to limit me. So I was always doing like the hip rotation. I do a lot of 90-90 like hip openers and just like focusing on optimizing how the hips move so that the low back doesn't have to take on too much load. And so that was kind of where I just said, I'm not going to let my past medical history dictate what I can and can't do in the future. And so that was like where I adopted that for myself. And then as I moved through my career as a strength coach early on, it was always around like optimal performance and injury prevention. But more and more so, I'd be getting athletes, they'd be coming to me out of season with like a slew of injuries. And so we'd be doing so much rehab. And I really wanted those manual therapy skills. So that was when I went back to chiro school to, get a very good understanding for like the biomechanics of the body, injury mechanism, and then how to optimize healing through some of these like soft tissue protocols out there, using things like the active release and the dry needling to really help stimulate healing and then load and rehab to guide the return to play.
Yeah. Okay. I want to. So chiropractor, it's one of those things that I think a lot of people are hesitant about.
Yeah.
Right? and I want to dive back into the strength training world as well because I love that stuff. But for chiropractic care, there's a lot of myths around it, or there's like there's an idea that it's like, oh, it doesn't work, oh, it's
Right.
stupid, or I can do it myself or whatever.
Yeah.
Because my ex is actually a chiropractor, and
Oh, no kidding.
I remember being like, well, I can just twist my back and it
Yeah.
like, why can I do that? And she's like, well, because we're not getting specific. And so you're loosening up the joint that's above and below it. There's like a whole idea there and there's stuff that I don't know. But I'd love if you could, for the audience, like maybe clarify some of those myths. Like,
Yeah.
does chiropractic care actually work?
Yeah. So I think it all comes down to the approach, right? And this is like anything in musculoskeletal care. If you say like, hey, the only way to fix knee pain is to get the joint replaced, then you're leaving out just like you're doing it a disservice by reducing everything to just the one treatment protocol. Whereas like in chiropractic, like the adjustment, and this is the first time I'm probably the atypical chiropractor in the sense that this is the first time you and I are talking adjustment, and we've been on this call for like 15 minutes now. But the way that I view the adjustment is that it's supplemental to anything else that we're doing in the overall like patient care picture. Because I'm not the chiropractor who will say like, hey, we've got to make this specific adjustment to fix your movement pattern, or else everything else up and down the chain is gonna be broken, right? I really view the human body as resilient in the sense that, okay, maybe you have a slight leg length discrepancy, or maybe there's not as much extension through the mid back as we would like. Let's do everything we can to optimize that using the adjustment as a piece of that puzzle, that treatment puzzle.
Yeah.
But it's not the end all be all, right? Because like if somebody comes into my office, like if I have a patient coming in later today, and we adjust their spine and then they go back out into the world and they're, for the rest of their week and the rest of their, next couple of weeks, they're just out there doing their thing. Like I've only been able to touch a fraction of a percentage of their life, right? Like as opposed to the way that I practice is somebody comes in, I spend a full hour with them. If we're doing an assessment, it's a full hour. We're looking head to toe, like what's going on with the body, with your movement mechanics that might be indicative of, what caused your injury.
Right.
That way we uncover, like, again, looking at, specific injuries of the shoulder or of the neck, and we can say, oh, we've got this lacking ability to stabilize down through the lumbar spine. Let's address that while we also treat the shoulder to help its healing process. But we're not just relying on just the adjustment to fix everything.
Yes, you take a more, if I'm understanding correctly, you take a more global approach. Like you want.
Yeah. I think it's, again, it's one of those things that like the adjustment itself has been shown to help mobilize joints. It helps. Are you familiar with like proprioceptive abilities, right? Like of a joint capsule. Yep. So like with a joint that we're going to personify joints here. So if a joint thinks that it's in danger, then the muscles around it guard. And the capsule itself might be inhibited, right? So it's like its sensory fibers aren't sensing where it is in space as well as it should be. So it's a little discoordinated. So now it's prone to a couple of things, either shortening, stiffening, chronic tightness, chronic pain, or like aberrant movement patterns, poorly controlled and coordinated movement patterns. And so then the next time it's in an aberrant position, right? Like deadlifting with a flexed spine, then all of a sudden that area sounds the alarm, right? And it's less of like, it was just the joint, or it was just the muscle, or it was just the nervous system. That's why we call it neuromusculoskeletal system. They all work together to stabilize things and to help, complete human movement.
Yeah, fascinating. So someone who comes into your office and they let's just say they come in and they're talking about back pain.
Yeah.
Right. What's your process for assessing that? Like, and maybe for someone at home who's listening, it's like, it's like I feel like I just need to have my back popped, or I feel like I need to whatever. Like what's your process for assessing that and helping someone work through that so they can get back to, we'll just call it being functional. Maybe not even like
Right.
do super, super athletic things, but just being functional and out of pain. What's that process look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first and foremost, I always make sure that the patients who come into my office, they understand that their goals are my goals, right? As opposed to you know, me trying to project what I want as the chiropractor onto them, right? Better joint mobility, right? That might mean nothing to somebody if all they really want is reduced pain, right? And like, especially depend, like you said, if it's somebody who's just they want to be able to play in the yard with their grandkids and then not have to like ice their back all night as a result of that,
Yeah.
then I look at it and I'm like, all right, that's the goal. I can help you with that goal, right? So like my process, basically what I'll go through is I'll take a complete history to understand like, how long the injury's been going on, what tends to create pain versus alleviate pain. Those are all good indicators as to like, okay, what might be like the tissue that's provoking the pain here, right? Because in some cases it's a nerve is being irritated. In some cases it's the muscle is in spasm, and then in other cases like you have a sincere joint sprain, right? Like one of those facet joints in the low back. And so, you know, basically going through that process to better understand like what might be the pain generating tissue, um, and at the same time rule out anything that we call red flags, right? So like you want to make sure first and foremost when somebody comes in with like back pain or neck pain that it's like, hey, this is not an emergent condition. And once we can confirm that with a series of questions that we have, then we can make sure, okay, yeah, this is musculoskeletal. We're going to work on this. We're going to get you through this. Um, and that's where like our process starts of like better understanding the patient's pain and their relationship to the pain.
Yeah.
Um, because that's arguably one of the most important things that we can understand is like, so you and I, for example, right? Like as athletes, we've always been exposed to like training elicits some level of soreness. So in theory, soreness or discomfort means I got a good training session.
Right.
So like if I feel something, I'll try and actually workshop it myself. But the next patient who comes in might say, when I feel pain, it makes me really anxious. And I say, okay, why? And they say, well, it means that I might not be able to play with my grandkids. And I say, okay, that's understandable that makes you anxious. Like, what's your belief around what's going on in your low back? Well, it feels like I bulged a disc. We need better terminology for a lot of this stuff. Bulged a disc just sounds terrifying, right?
Yeah.
So if you believe that you've bulged a disc, it's pressing into your spinal canal, you're going to get weakness in your legs, and you'll no longer be able to play with your grandkids. Your pain experience compared to me saying, I deadlifted, I pushed my body today, I've got a little bit of stiffness in the low back, but I'm going to warm it up with some hip mobility and we'll be good. Two
Yeah.
drastically different experiences.
Extremely different. Yeah. And I'm so glad you're talking about this because yeah, the relationship to pain is so fascinating. Like to give people context, like I'll just use myself for an example. Like I've hurt my back twice in the past 2 years to the point where like turning your steering wheel in your car is like painful. Like
Yeah.
one wrong step and you're about to collapse. Like so much pain. And what's crazy is in my head, I was like, okay, I'm out for 6 months. Like that's where I was in my head. I'm out for 6 months. A week later, I was good. Like
Yeah.
able to go back in and work out. And so, yeah, that relationship to pain and understanding your body and like, okay, this pain doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. There's something going on, but jumping to those conclusions, it's just education and maybe
Yep.
experience and all those things. And so, yeah, I'd love for you to hit on that a little bit more of like how can people I guess lower their anxiety
Yeah.
around maybe pain they're experiencing. What's some practical things they can do for that? Or what do you tell people that come into your clinic?
Yeah, yeah, great question. Because these are like the action items that we want more people to be better educated on, so that like if and when back pain pops up, because statistically speaking, I think we are looking at right now like 90% of the U.S. population will experience back pain at some point in time, And then of that 90%, 50% of those cases will be recurring, right? So like in your case, it's recurred, it's come back, and it'll probably come back again at some point in time. But knowing, understanding your body, right? So like when you feel something, especially in an acute sense. I don't know if your injury was like a deadlifting type injury or had a specific mechanism. You look at what caused the injury, and then understand that like, okay, I can look at this from the perspective that like my body is very resilient, which they are, right? We see a lot of people with, if we did imaging, they have some pretty gnarly looking spines and like bulging this, that, and the other, but they have no pain.
Yeah, it's
So
crazy.
to me, what that says is the structure of your spine need not dictate the function. If anything, your beliefs are going to be more impactful here. So in the short term, I would say first and foremost, get mindful of the movements that provoke your pain, because it's one of the best guiding questions that I have when I'll work with a patient is I'll say, okay, does bending to touch your toes or tie your shoes, does that hurt? Oh yeah, doc, that lights me up. I'm like, okay. So if I give you a forward flexion exercise of any kind right now, that's going to light you up and perpetuate this belief that you are fragile and injured and will not be back to activity for 6 months.
Right.
Whereas if I say, what about bending backwards? And they say, oh yeah, that I can do that. And they have good range of motion there. And they're like, hey, that actually feels good. Then I'm like, great, there's your first exercise. And they're like, exercise? I'm injured. I threw my back out, right? Another term that like leads to this belief that it's like, my back is out of place. Until you put it back in place, I'm going to be injured. And I say, well, no, like if we can get you doing like 3 by 15 a day of just back bends, then at the very least, we're creating like that joint motion that we want, which creates fluid flow into and out of the joints. It encourages muscle extensibility and it desensitizes the nervous system. Arguably, the most important part in this acute phase of injury is showing the nervous system that you're okay. Because, like,
that is so pivotal.
That's the thought process, right? It's so easy. Like even we as like people who understand anatomy and physiology at a different level will feel something and be like, oh, I'm in trouble now. Like driving is going to be hard for the next couple of months, right? But like to take that, like take a beat and like sit down, just breathe, just be mindful, focus on like, oh, okay, like actually, you know, I've got some movements here that not only don't provoke my pain, but actually relieve it. Then in that early phase, the first 7 to 10 days, that's your key, right? Like all you can do is extension, then you do a lot of extension, right? A lot of extension based movement. And so like, I follow that thread and I say, all right, well, if a back bend is pain free, then let's see how a bird dog reach feels. And they're like, that feels great too. I'm like, okay, now let's see how a prone press up feels, right? So now we're loading the facet into extension. They're like, that actually feels great too. And then over a course of time, usually 10 days or 2 weeks into that, like extension based loading, then they say to me, oh yeah, like I'm actually now when I'm back bending, I'm getting like a little bit of a pinch there. And I'm like, great. Now we're in the green zone to basically start to try and reintroduce flexion of the spine. And that's where people are like, oh, wow, I can touch my toes again. Like I thought I'd never reach past my kneecaps again.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's crazy you talk about like calming down the nervous system. Like I was actually going to make a video on this, like a piece of content of like, like what's the first thing you should do when you tweak your back? Because
Yeah.
like people freak out. And
Right.
I did exactly I'll speak personally. Like I did exactly what you said there. It's like just didn't let myself freak out. It's
Yeah.
like just like take some breaths, like try to calm your nervous system down. Maybe do some like I don't know what you would say about this, but I laid on my back and I filled up my belly with air, and then like I braced and like almost where I could feel
Yeah.
my obliques get tight, and just so I worked on getting some stability in there, some bracing in there. Did
Yeah.
a little bit of decompression. I walked, I rode the bike. Like I just did stuff that I could do and
Yeah.
didn't let myself freak out. And then
Mhm.
eventually it was like, okay, mobility and movement is being restored. I guess this wasn't as bad as I thought it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
think it's important for people to realize, like, don't jump to conclusions. Like, you don't know. I know it hurts. I know it's freaking you out, but just take a moment. Like, bring yourself down. And I
Yeah.
think that's huge.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, like realistically, the way that you manage that one is everything that I would recommend. Cause it's like, to put it simply, it's movement as tolerated, right?
Yeah.
Because like I use the example of a lot of extension, but yeah, if the only thing you can do pain free, um, in the first couple of days after that, that back injury occurs is walk, then you walk, man. Like that's it, right? And you can walk as long as you want, like especially if it's not provoking your pain and if anything relieving it, then yeah, you're in a good spot to keep up with. Like view that like again as people who like lift heavy things, run far distances. If there's a period of time where my body's like, you know, not really not able to get into a heavy deadlift session or something like that, then I'm just going to take what my body's giving me and change up the training so that I can still get a training stimulus, but without having to like push past my threshold.
Yeah. Yeah. The term letting pain be your guide is so helpful. It was helpful for me, at least. Like, just letting pain be your guide. Like, don't going, like, at least this is what I do. I don't know what you would tell the patients that come in, but I try not to go above like a level 4 or 5 of like pain if I'm
Yeah,
going to try to progress something. Once I go past that, it's like, okay, I think I'm doing more damage than I am good here. But if it's
yeah,
like a 2 or a 3, like using that flexion example, like a
yeah,
Jefferson curl, if I can go like halfway down and it's like a level 2 or 3 and come back up, okay, that's where I'm going to stay for now, and just
yeah.
pain really guide my movement.
Yeah, and I have like an exact framework for that I have my patients follow, right? So when they're coming back from an injury, um, we just call it like the stoplight of pain, right? So 0 to 3 out of 10, that's your green light. Whatever you've done, we'll use Jefferson curl. It's a great example for low back pain. If you are doing your Jefferson curl and it gets up to a 2 during your exercises, but it calms right down after, you've got the green light. Do more of the same movement with the same number of reps. And if anything, you can increase the weight, right? Start to load the system because the system will adapt, right? Now, when we look at like the 4 to 6, that's our yellow light. So you're going to proceed with caution. You either do your 10 reps of Jefferson curl with, whatever you've got on the bar, 95 pounds, right? And you complete the movement, but it gets up to a 6 during that exercise. And then you basically have two options here. So you want to look at the next 24 hours, what happens to the pain. If it got up to a 6 during the exercise, but within 3-4 hours after, it's calmed back down to baseline, boom, you're good. That was a comfortable amount of load, comfortable amount of reps, and the exercise is good for you. Now, if it gets up to a 6 and it lingers 24, 48 hours later, it's still aching, then you haven't done harm, but you just want to reel it back in a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Start the next round of Jefferson curls with 75 pounds. Pull some weight off the bar, maybe reduce the volume a little bit. Just maybe change the exercise if you need to. But like those are the types of things where there's like actually a lot more, I think, degrees of freedom in that rehab process than people realize. Whereas like the only time we say red light, stop, remove the exercise, do something different is if the pain climbs up to a 7, 8, 9 out of 10 and then stays there, right? Like that's where it's like, let's not even play that game. Let's hold off for right now until the Jefferson curl is a 2 or a 3 out of 10 because we know time is really our best friend.
Yeah, 100%. No, that's cool. And I want to dive into this too. Looking at 1047. So I think it'd be really important to hit on this
Yeah.
before you have to jump on a call as well. Um, People who experience, and again, educate me if I have this wrong, but people who experience chronic pain in certain areas, whether it's knee, back, shoulder, whatever, and they do a perpetual amount, crazy amount of stretching. They're like, oh, I just got to stretch it out and I got to loosen it up. When in reality, from what I've learned and experienced in my own life, we don't need to stretch it anymore. We need to actually strengthen it. We need to actually create some tension there
Yeah.
because the pain is being caught. Like it's trying to tighten up. At least from what I understand, it's trying to tighten up, and you're loosening it back up, and no one's saying, "No, come back here." We need to create some strength and some resilience there. I don't know what you would say to people out there, how they can navigate that, or how you navigate that with your patients.
Yeah, stretching is this is one I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll keep the science. We'll keep flip flopping on it over the years. Like I grew up playing sports, and like you always had to stretch before you went out for went out to play basketball or even nowadays, right? You like hear of somebody who's like, "Oh, I gotta stretch. Like I gotta warm up," and I'm like, the lion doesn't have to warm up before it goes and hunts down its prey, right? Like the lion doesn't sit there and do toe touches before it goes and catches the zebra. So like, why are we as humans so like feel the need to warm up? And I think it's multifactorial, right? I think we sit more than any animal in the animal kingdom. And so our tissues are shorter and stiffer, but also we don't load the system the way that we want to. And so it surprises me the number of times I've fielded this comment of people being like, "Oh, you're a chiropractor. I bet you stretch a bunch, right?" And full disclosure, I don't ever stretch. I do mobility,
I don't stretch at
but
all. At all.
like, dude, I go way deep into like a rear foot elevated split squat. By all means, get that hip extension. But I'm not sitting here doing like, 30 seconds per side, stretch my hip flexors. Like, I think there's a time and a place, especially anything that makes you feel good. But like, the way I look at it is, the number of times that I've heard somebody say, like, oh, I don't really have time to train, or like, I don't really have time to, do X, Y, or Z. You and I are both dads to young kids. Like, I think the important thing is stacking some of these habits where we can kill two birds with one stone. And so with the stretching, stretching as an example, we don't necessarily have the time for it. And so if anything, like I would encourage people to lean into, finding load as a way of teaching their bodies to move better and be more resilient. Because especially when it comes to chronic pain, like if I've got chronic low back pain, I'm not going to want to jump straight to a loaded Jefferson curl. But like the rehab process I will design for that person is 100% going to include eventually a loaded Jefferson curl, right? Like that's part of our journey, that it's got to culminate with loaded spinal flexion, or else we can expect that the lumbar spine extensors will always be a little bit weak, a little bit sensitive to that movement. And so, we can allow the load to guide us, right? Like we can allow that weight to kind of teach and retrain our bodies that like, hey, movement is okay. Like movement is medicine here. And I'm the first to say, like with my history of low back stuff and everything like that, like my low back will tighten up. But when it tightens up is like after a long car ride. Even if I'm standing doing notes at the standing desk all day, it'll start to get stiff. And my fix is like I'll pop out to my clinic is located within a gym. I'll pop out to the gym and I'll do like a movement snack or a movement break. I'll swing the kettlebell, for 5-10 minutes. I'll do some heavy deadlifts. I'll kind of microdose the movement back in there so that then my body, feels and moves better. You get your heart rate back up. You get your respiratory rate back up. Like you're stimulated to carry on with the rest of your day. And like, I think that's, something we need to normalize as well. Hey, movement is all around you. You just got to find ways to mix it in.
No, that's so awesome, dude. Okay, so we're at 10:52. We'll end it there, but I want to end it with, if you could summarize everything we just talked about to someone out there listening, to give them like an action step, like how would you summarize this to tell someone go and actually like get to moving better and feeling better?
Yeah, I would say probably like the biggest thing that we all need to focus on is like changing the narrative around pain and movement, right? Like at the societal level, because like too much of our messaging is like focused on, hurt equals harm. The medication's going to be the quick fix, or go for the quick fix, right? Like we know that our world is like kind of dialed in on the smartphone and like instant gratification and stuff like that. pain rarely is. Every now and then, like there's an acute flare up of pain that all you need is a quick adjustment or some soft tissue work or dry needling, and it's like, boom, fix. But for the most part, we need to be more patient, right? Like we need to focus on things and sink our teeth into the process and really start to view injury as a gift. Because if you suffer an injury in your 20s and 30s, believe that by focusing on your health and fitness and like working on hip mobility and ankle mobility at a younger age and like learning about that stuff is going to serve you in your 40s and 50s. But like that's what I think is like, regardless of where the injury pops up, where it occurs, more than anything, it's shining the light on maybe some level of deficiency that, hey, if you popped your Achilles playing sprinting around the backyard with the kids, then that's just a sign that like, go through the surgical process, go through the rehab process, but eventually you got to get back to plyometric training. Like you and I wouldn't have to be constantly pumping out videos of like, here's how to do a box jump. If we just encourage people at the societal level to never stop box jumping.
That is, yes. Just don't stop moving.
Yeah.
like that, man, that is so key. And I tell that to people too, like, okay, yeah, you've been out of it for years and it's going to take you a little while to get into it. But once you get into it, just don't stop. It's
exactly.
What's the law of physics? I'm not a physicist, but like Newton's law, like an object in motion tends to stay in motion, right? Like it's the same concept. Like as long as you just keep it moving, like, man, you can stay super resilient for a really long time. Really.
That's it, man.
Well, this is fantastic, dude. I think I would love to do another one with you in the future sometime because I know we were a little short today. So maybe we'll line one up and we can pick another topic to chat about. But this would be really helpful for people to understand that they can change that belief around pain, and it's not as bad as it's not this big monster, right? It's just something to learn and grow through. So I think it's really cool.
Absolutely, man. No, I appreciate you having me, and I think it's the type of thing that with like platforms like these, like we can spread this message, right? Because like it's no secret there's not a ton of funding in like lifting heavy and staying active and eating good foods, but like we do know that like the roles that you and I play in our communities respectively and in our families is like that role of leadership where like we gotta keep putting this out there and inspiring people to say, hey, there's like a different way to go about this, and like living your life fragile or kind of like prone to injury is not something that's interesting to me. So I look at it, and we can always go a step further when it comes to like increasing the knowledge, giving people the power to make their own decisions, to improve their training styles, to improve their lifestyles, and that's one of the most powerful things you can do for a person.
Awesome, love
it. Yeah,
it.
man.
All right, where can people find you on social media? What's your Instagram handle? I'll link it in the show notes. But
So my Instagram handle is at dr.bmchuma. That's probably the best place to find me. Shoot me a message if you have questions or need any assistance with something that you're dealing with. Obviously, this is what I do day in and day out here in the clinic. But I do have all of those virtual rehab options where we can take people through this process near and far, which I think is really cool. It's one of those evolutions that the technology has allowed us to help people across the country, across the world, really.
That's so cool. All right, dude. Well, hey, thank you for coming on and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, man. Yeah, you as well.